George Araujo, scholar, former chemist, and pharmaceutical researcher and director. Today, we have several topics, but Oh, hi, Nico. Welcome.
Hey, what's going on? Just tripped.
Welcome.
You're early, brother.
Hey,
I didn't know if you were coming
I
today.
like to stress you guys out.
Not at all.
Oh, yeah, right.
Fashionably late.
Something that everybody's been talking about this week is Silicon Valley Bank. It happened last week, and a lot of people were saying, why aren't you talking about it? And there were so many questions about, well, what does that have to do with me? Silicon Valley Bank, that is nothing that's going to affect my life. I don't have any association with them. But then the government stepped in. And so I have a lot of questions. I hope other people don't think that it's just a one bank situation. Is it, Nico? Is it, George?
I think there's consequences that can spill over into other banks and just the banking institution in general. And so there's been a lot of commentary this week. I think a lot of people have heard different commentary. But it's important. I mean, George has some interesting points to make, I think, this morning about that. And we can bounce those around. But we need to be alert. Let's put it that way, because you look at that, you look at what else is going on in the country at this time, from the border to the banking system, and what's really going on when you think about all these things happening synergistically. What is trying to be accomplished and by whom, and where does this lead? So it's not that the bank itself, because that Silicon Valley Bank is not the bank that you probably put your money in or I put my money in.
Correct.
We're not worried about grandpa and grandpa's IRA or retirement fund in that bank. This was a very specialized bank, but there's more to it. That was a poorly managed bank. And it has to do with the bond industry and bond rates and interest rates going up, affecting bonds. So there's a lot of you can get stuck in the minutia and the details, but we need to look at the bigger picture, I think.
George.
Yeah, there's the economics of it, which are we work very hard to try to make less than boring, right, Nico?
I don't know.
They're relevant. They're relevant, but they're only half the arguments here. And in the environment that we're in here politically in the United States, you got to look at the political angle. You always have to do that. The reality here, and it's a sad reality, but it's true, is that we have a government that exploits every piece of major news to centralize power. And so you always you got to live in a real world. And that's the real world. We always try to do a political angle here. I am of the opinion, Nico and I have chatted back and forth about this, that I don't think that the government of the United States doesn't benefit from this. I do believe that they benefit from that. I think we have, we position it that way in here, Karen, don't we? It's not really conservatives versus liberals anymore. It's not Republicans and Democrats. It's conservatives and communists. That's the sad reality of the situation. You have individuals who don't give a crap about the Bill of Rights. Can you say that on the radio?
You can,
it's too
and
late.
You did. Yeah.
Can and I did. That's the reality of it. So the idea, what do we always say, Nico? And we're quoting Dennis Prager here. You have the American notion of a bigger citizen and a smaller government. And what we're seeing is an inversion of that experiment, incrementally, week by week by week. And I believe what's happened here with SVB, if you look at it politically, is ultimately about centralizing power and control over capital in the United States. This doesn't hurt Biden. I think it helps him.
George, some might say that you sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Look, it's funny you said that, 'cause we talked about you don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. What does that mean anymore? We use that so much.
Right.
I'm a truth theorist. If the truth sounds weird, you have to think about what I've done and do for a living, where you're trying to figure out a murder, you're trying to prosecute this, you're trying to figure out this intricate detail of whatever circumstance, and he goes, that's a weird theory. Well, let's follow it. Let's follow the evidence wherever it leads us, and if it's a weird theory, but it's a true theory, well, so be it. Life is weird. So, using that term conspiracy theorist, I just think that's a way to shut people up. I think we've overused it. I think we overuse hate. We overuse love. We overuse this. We overuse a lot, and we diminish the meaning of it. What is a conspiracy theorist? What does a conspiracy really mean? Conspiracy means something different in my world versus a conspiracy theorist. It means someone making up kooky ideas to distract you from the truth. That's the way I kind of think of a conspiracy theorist. Well, a lot of things were conspiracy theorists 2 years ago. thinking about, whether it was about those shots or whether it was about where this virus came from or whether it was about, the masks or whatever. You're just a conspiracy theorist. You're a nut job. Well, a lot of these conspiracy theorists have come true, or whether big tech was involved in the elections and they were working with the government. Well, you're just a weirdo. You got a tinfoil hat. That's just to shut people up. I want people to share their ideas, and the court of public opinion will tell you where you need to go. That's a stupid idea. Go somewhere else. I mean, look at the Murdoch trial that we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago. 6 weeks of a trial. Regular citizens, using common sense and a lot of logic, came back with a 3-hour verdict, and they called BS. They called BS on all these theories and the defense of that, and they called BS on it. I think America can do the same thing.
I think with Silicon Valley Bank, it's very easy to complicate this issue, because when you start talking about the housing industry and the Federal Reserve and the government and banking, I myself just stare blankly going, what are they talking about? I don't get it. How is it, what are the ripple effects going to be on us? And it's because it is a complicated and it's not a sexy subject, but the end game, the one that hopefully we'll get to discuss today, it will become an eye-opener and more than just sounding like some kind of conspiracy theory like the COVID situation.
Absolutely. We look forward very much to getting, I don't know about in the weeds on this, but getting just a little bit under the hood here. We can touch on the economics a little bit, Karen and Nico, but and then we can talk a little bit about the politics. But I think this is something that should be analyzed more. I know there's been a lot of, Nico and I was just chatting, there's a lot of talking about this, but I think people are dancing around critical issues here, and I think it's unfortunate. Yeah, we've heard about the interest rates and bonds. I get it. During the Trump era, this bank did quite fine. It attracted, because most people know.
It was a specialized bank.
Indeed.
It wasn't a regular
and most
bank.
people know that there's an inverse relationship between rates of interest rates and bonds. When interest rates are in the basement, as they've been for the last several years, certainly during the Trump administration, you move, a lot of your investments are going to be towards bonds. In the case of this bank, it's high-yielding short and long-term bonds. Okay, great. That's very attractive. And they had some real huge venture capital firms put just millions and millions of dollars into these high-yield bond investments. Now, this isn't rocket science, right? So we have Biden come in. We have $5 to $6 trillion of printed money awash in the economy, right? So your money's worth less, okay? And that relationship begins to change between interest rates and bonds. Interest rates start just going sky high, right, Nico? Because we got serious inflation problems here, and the Fed's trying to contain inflation. They called, wait for it, transitory. But Janet Yellen was Secretary of the Treasury, was just testifying in Congress this week. Why anybody even asks her anything is beyond me, because it was her logic that ultimately sort of promulgated us getting in the situation we're in right now. We should have been battling inflation a long time ago, but here we are, and now we have this relationship has flipped. This bank's got all kinds of money and assets that are tied up in bonds. Yes, I realize there's a bunch of other crappy investments in all kinds of green sector nonsense, which doesn't help. But the reality is that changed on them. So now they have these worthless bonds, really, because interest rates are in a stratosphere, really. 40-year inflation highs, bonds are in the basement, and now they got no money. They can't. They were operating in a negative. Yeah. I mean, so
if you look at their balance sheet and you look at the way they were running their banks and their funds and their diversity, there's a word diversity, diversification of their investments to make sure you have these risk management officers in banks to make sure that your balance sheet is operating appropriately. And they just ran this bank horribly. I'm sorry, George. I just wanted to...
No, that's right. And so this changed on them. And ironically here, the Biden administration, by virtue of government agencies, yes, like the Treasury Department and FDIC, the Federal Department of Insurance, I think it's commission, steps in, really, think about it, to solve a problem that they exacerbated. Because what brings us here? Did this bank have a problem during the Trump administration, for instance, when economic policy was exactly the opposite of the Biden administration? They did quite well, didn't they? So it's interestingly, again, the government stepping in to fix problems that ultimately they help very much create. That pattern happens over and over.
But what does it do? What does that lead to, Karen? That leads to control. So we've talked about this over years now, I guess it's been, where you create a problem and then you make yourself the savior. Well, that gives you more power, that gives you more authority, that gives you more influence over people. And that's what's happened. I mean, look at the COVID situation. Look at all this stuff.
Exactly what I was going to say.
It's the same model.
Same thing.
But the only way they can do that if they create division. Remember 2-3 years ago, no conversation, no corporate policy, no governmental policy, no anything. And even churches fell for this crap. What you had to talk about black and white. That was it. It was black and white. Everything was about your skin color. Then it turned into what? Mask or no mask. And then what did it turn into? Shots or no shot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and now these things just keep on changing. It keeps evolving. Well, they ride that out as long as you can. And then people hopefully are waking up and learn to critically think and ask questions and push back and educate themselves and vote, these idiots out. I mean, people that they think this way. I mean, like George said, wherever we got it from. But, the Constitution and the American experiment had the idea, and here's an idea. We want a big citizen. We want a citizen that can pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And that meant something. What does that mean? You can own property. You can educate yourself. You can be an entrepreneur. You can worship the way you want to. You raise your child the way you want to. Government's going to do the bare minimum to make sure you can do all these things. The government's going to help facilitate these ideas. That's what it's going to do. And the government's going to protect these God-given rights, right? That are inalienable. They're inseparable. Government didn't give them to you. So governments can't take them away from you. Government's job is to protect those rights and to make sure that you're afforded those rights. So we've gotten away from that experiment a long time ago. And so that's what I think George and I and yourself are.
And it's not just one, Nico, but it's not just, we talk a lot about SVB because it was the second largest, right, since 2008. But in 1 week, we had 3 bank failures, not just one. We had Silver Lake, SVB, right, and Signature Bank.
But you know what, George, only you know that. And so you have to help explain to us what this means.
So selfish with your knowledge.
Karen Klaus, Nico LaHood, George Arujo. This is Sidebar. We'll be right back. Show and after the show for possibly more topics. But this one that we're talking about seems to be so complicated to me that I think that we should break it down. So we're talking about Silicon Valley Bank and how it became the largest bank failure, as they're saying, since 2008, the financial crisis that happened then. But things are different with Silicon Valley Bank. How are they different, George?
Well, the similarities, right, between Silicon Valley Bank and I mentioned Silver Lake and Signature Bank, is that they were, in terms of their investment portfolios, you had mentioned, Nico, it was rather narrow. It's very cryptocurrency based and very techno stock based. These are just by their nature, Karen, speculative investments. These are new technologies. Venture capitals think they're on to the newest and greatest thing. They pump a ton of money into it, and by nature they're just skeptical. And some of it, I'm sure, is fantastically promising, but they are speculative investments and by nature more risky. And so that's what's kind of common across these three types of banks. And so I said from the get-go when we were texting, if you guys recall, I didn't quite shrug my shoulders, but I said, because everybody was saying, oh my gosh, there's going to be a massive national bank run on every bank, right? That was sort of the initial fear. And I said, these are apples and oranges. These banks, to Nico's earlier point again, have very narrow investment portfolios. And that's not the case with let's talk about a local stable bank that most people, let's say Broadway Bank, for instance. Their portfolios are very diverse. And you guys heard about diversification, like you mentioned. You got a finance degree, so you should be talking. I should shut up.
Yeah, right.
Although I do have an MBA that I need to dust off occasionally. But you don't need any of those degrees to understand that if one portion of your portfolio fails and you've diversified your risk, then the less chance that you're going to end up coming out negative as a whole. And I think that's really the problem with these banks, a very narrow investment portfolio. They made some very, very crappy investments. A lot of that was in the bond situation that we were talking about. We've eroded basically the valuation of those bonds with the interest rates going through the roof. And this bank, frankly, simply couldn't pay their bills. And they announced on the Wednesday before the failure, they announced that they were coming up short in terms of cash on hand.
And then they had a bank.
So if you're a depositor, guess what you're going to do?
Run to the bank and try to get your money?
And the initial people made out fine, but the people in the back end were screwed. And so here we are. And so you saw similar banks follow suit.
But I heard a reporting that 90% of those the people that were banking there were not FDIC.
94%, that's right.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean?
Meaning that they have huge accounts. These are not, this is not the everyday person. Remember, FDIC insures up to $250,000 per account.
That's it.
So these are people that was a substantial amount of money, 94% of them. This is not the everyday bank. And this is where I think a number of people were trying to say, slow down, calm down. It's something to think about. How did we get here? What happened? You need to look at that big picture for sure from a macro level. But when you dig down deeper, this was a poorly managed bank. I mean, I think there's going to be an investigation because the bank leaders took out their money. They
there's that.
Yeah, I mean, you got a whole different aspect.
Weeks
before they knew about it. So there's this mismanagement for sure. A lot of people believe that this should have ended up in the market where another bank would acquire the bank and the government should not have stepped in, which I think ultimately happened, right, George? Didn't somebody acquire that bank? I think I don't know the name of the other bank. I can't remember off the top of my head. But let the market be the market. This is a poorly managed bank. It was very speculative, like George said, and then let free market do what it does.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And that's really what should have happened. There are other banks who were in the running. But you're going to compete against the federal government? Try that sometime. I mean, you had PNC Bank that was tentatively looking at it. JP Morgan Chase was looking at it. The SVP branch in UK, for instance, was acquired by HSBC, which is another British bank. That's right. Let that play out rather than the federal government stepping in and taking control of the situation. Look, if I could, to just get out of the economics for a moment, or at least the sort of lower weeds economics and get into the 35,000 foot level, just real simple. We're $31 trillion in debt. Where's the money coming from? Oh, the federal government's going to come in and
from us.
And this is the the grumbling in the news. They're going to come in. They're going to save the day, and they're going to protect those depositors. Don't worry, we're fine. We're not going to bail out the bank. Screw the bank. We're gonna protect those depositors. Okay, fantastic. Where's the money coming from? $31 trillion of debt. We're paying about, wait for it, about $1 trillion a year in interest. We're paying $1 trillion a year in interest to people who are, well, we mentioned, I'm sorry to say it, China.
Yeah, China.
Japan is the number one holder of U.S. federal debt, followed by China, mostly foreign bodies. Not exactly friendly. Japan's
listen
fine.
To those numbers. I mean,
you can't even
say these numbers
right.
As if 31 trillion. That's why when someone says, 100 billion a year, what? And think about what we're talking about. Any normal business
doesn't go
for
into
sure,
my
a
head,
household,
right.
1 billion. It's like, well, since you think it's not a big deal, all these trillions, how about just give me a $500 million? I mean, it sounds like a bargain, right? I mean, when you think about it, I mean, we're talking about numbers that our great-great-great-grandchildren will never get out of if we don't watch it. What are we doing here? I mean, this is an implosion within. So what's the response? Does the government tell George and I were talking briefly? So what? You owe China and Japan money. You can tell them to go, screw off. Okay, and then what? Then nobody produces any products. Then you're on your own. I mean, you're talking about this turns into an international, mess. But who wants what? I'm going to get back to scripture, Proverbs 22. That the borrower is enslaved to the lender, right? It's an idea that if you're in debt for a long extended period, with personal, professional. I mean, obviously, debt is not a great thing. It can be utilized. I think it's not terrible. I think there's a purpose for debt. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying overall, long term. I mean, you always owe somebody. You're never on your own. You don't have complete freedom if you owe somebody. So you say, and that's why there's an argument some people make that even when you pay off your house, you still owe property taxes. I mean, so you're always going to owe somebody something. Well, but think about this: $31 trillion, and there's no signs of slowing down.
Nico, I want to give Kevin McCarthy, who I've been very impressed with, I think, as of you, as of late. I got to give him some credit. I think he did an interview. Was it March 9th on Breitbart? And I think he ought to do more of those. I thought this is the kind of stuff that our leaders ought to be doing. Our leaders ought to be educating the American people and actually having substantive conversations. And he said something really interesting, and I had to write it down because I thought it was really excellent. He said, look, here's the forecast for the next 10 years. Over the next 10 years, we're going to be paying $10.5 trillion just in interest. Imagine a balance on your credit card that you never pay off. You're paying into perpetuity.
I don't have to imagine that, but go ahead.
So then he said, okay. He's like, how much interest, just for perspective, everyone, how much interest have we paid over the last 80 years, 8 decades? He goes, let's go back to 1940, he says. If you add up all of the interest that we've paid on our debt, total national debt since 1940, we've paid $9 trillion. So what took you more than 80 years, you're going to pay more in 10 years. 8 times faster.
I'm glad that he was educating.
And it raises an interesting question. How the hell are we going to do that? Let's see. Our manufacturing base has shrunk in the United States. It has increased. So what exactly are we going to produce? Oh, I get it. We're buying from where primarily? Well, from China. Does that sound like a really good idea to be dependent on China? And not just for shoes and shirts, but for pharmaceuticals. Yeah. Basic pharmaceuticals, semiconductor parts, which we need to run our electronics. Salo, you're sitting over there nodding your head. It's kind of important to have semiconductor chips, don't you think? Yeah, it's useful to run your electronics, but it's kind of useful in things like, I don't know, the national military. You got to step back and say, could we possibly be this incompetent? Or is this truly, in fact,
this is where I think George wanted to go overall when you talk about the bank and the border and all this. I think, what are we doing here? How do you not look at this catastrophe, in my opinion, of this administration and not at least bring up the question, how is this not deliberate? I mean, how do you think this is a good idea? Now, you can say the sound bites. You can say, look over here. No is yes, yes is no. This is good, bad is good is bad. All the things we talk about. When you redefine things, I guess nothing matters really anymore. But how is this good? I'm really, and this is sincere, I mean, just what set of ideas has this administration set forth that have been a blessing to the vast majority of our citizens?
But Nico, the thing is, one, we have learned in the last several years with COVID that Americans are scared very easily into doing something or getting in a line and complying. And secondly, Americans want to be saved from the boogeyman. So whether it be COVID or China or money problems, it's now normal to say the government's going to save us and get us out of this. So this doesn't seem like such an odd thing for the government to step in and say, wait a second, we can help you.
This is why the nucleus of our moral compass and our resolve matters in this country, because we're scared. Being scared is normal. You've heard the analogy. The hero and the coward both have the same fear, but they both deal with it differently. The hero says, yes, I'm scared out of my pants, but I'm still going to go forward. I have the discipline and the desire and the perseverance to move forward. The coward says, man, I'm scared like the hero, but I don't have those things he has or she has, and I'm going backwards the other way. So fear is normal. What you do with that fear and how you respond versus react to that fear is something different. And then wanting to be saved because we're not self-sufficient, because we can't make our own room, as Jordan Peterson advocates, clean up your own room. Just take responsibility. I mean, these are basic biblical principles that he's just found a way to advocate, and he's been given a platform, and good for him, and I'm glad he's out there advocating them. But he didn't come up with these ideas. I mean, these are age-old principles that are your parents, your grandparents, or should have been your parents, grandparents for sure taught you. Take responsibility for your own actions. No one's going to save you. You got to do something yourself. Jesus saves, but on earth, everybody, you got to do things for yourself. And we're not taught these problems. We want the easy fix. We have a microwave mentality, the fast food mentality. We want quick cars, quick women, quick taxes, quick everything. And everything, we don't want to develop. We don't want to nurture. We don't want to mature. We want everything done for us. And it's entitlement. So that combination is horrific, and you're right. It was exposed during these last 2 years. Fear and how fear controls people, and then wanting to be saved because no fortitude or no perseverance. And that's why I've heard the argument, and I think it's valid, that manhood, true biblical manhood, like there's nothing toxic about manhood. If you're going to describe toxic masculinity, that's not masculinity. Call it something else. True masculinity, true manhood is not toxic. Not true biblical masculinity. And that's why it's important for a man and a woman, by the way, to be formidable, to be strong, to be dangerous even. Dangerous, what are you talking about? You're not advocating violence, no. But you should be dangerous in your mind and your abilities and what you can do so you can persevere and not be controlled by fear and scared.
We're going to take a break right now, but I do want to ask about central bank digital currency and how that might fit into what we're talking about with the banking situation. We'll have more coming up next on Sidebar. This is Sidebar, but you can always watch us on Facebook. You can find the link at sidebartv.com. Become a sponsor. Please tell friends about it. It's sidebartv.com. And we do have a show after the show, so please join us. So, George, you got to tell me, I keep on hearing about, is it CBDC, which is, central bank digital currency? And the reason I'm asking that is because I keep on trying to figure out what is the purpose of what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, and what is the end game, and why is the government, why do they have their fingers in it?
Well, I think the problem with cryptocurrencies, as the state is concerned, is that the regulatory infrastructure around cryptocurrency is very underdeveloped. So there's really no way, there's really no way to track things very well, and that does not bode well for a government that is, has a love affair with controlling things. So I think that's that relationship. And the reality is it's still sort of in its infancy. And there's lots of questions about how it works exactly. How are we going to transact business with it? You've heard lots about the Bitcoin, right? Sort of. I mean, can you think of anything that's gone up and down more dramatically than Bitcoin?
Stormy Daniels.
I mean, holy.
Yeah.
So much.
What?
Nice transition.
Nothing.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's what happens when I walk in from.
Nice.
Sorry.
Oh, man. Is it time?
Okay, back to crypto.
Yes. There's the transition sentence. Oh, man. Okay. So there's lots of regulatory questions, and like I said, it's still in its infancy. So it's inherently speculative. So all of these banks have that in common, and I think that's interesting, Karen. But I think what's really interesting and most concerning is where ultimately, as Nico always says, how does this play out?
Yeah.
And he and I were chatting briefly before, and I said, ultimately, I think you can kiss goodbye to the community bank, really. And this is what we were saying. Is the SVB collapse, is that really the problem, or is the response the problem? I think our solution is really much worse, far worse than the problem. Again, we don't have the money to be doing this. Taxpayers cannot sustain.
But what are you telling other banks like this, though, George? What are you telling other banks? Are you saying you can be as speculative as you want to? You can be as risky as you want to?
Exactly right.
You can be as irresponsible as you want to?
Exactly.
And here comes the government because we're happy to take authority and control. I mean, again, that's why I say play it out. Play it out. What does this idea and this behavior and this response do? And what is it saying? What message to other banks?
This is an important statement what Nico just said. This idea of constantly removing consequences from truly consequential behavior. And when you remove those consequences, what do you think is going to happen with human nature? We're going to do more of it, right? And so you're going to see more bank failures. You are. And in 24, mark my words, in 24, if Democrats win and Biden retains control of the White House, you're going to see a collapse of the financial sector like you've never seen before. Nico just stated that about 90-94% of these deposits at SVP weren't even FDIC insured. And think about the math. We're talking about, what was it? It was like over $200 billion in assets, over $176 billion in deposits, $400 billion, right? We're not talking about thousands of dollars. And Nico just said the FDIC has a cap of insurance on $250,000 per account.
Right.
So what are you going to do as a depositor when you come to SVB? You're going to open up 1,000 accounts of $250,000? No one does that. And so, yes, of course, a lot of those were uninsured. So the FDIC now steps in to miraculously cover stuff, which they're not supposed to be covering, on your backs and my backs. Okay, so now the Johnny's Bank around the corner here, what do you think is going to happen to them? What's going to happen to them is their fees, because how does the FDIC fund get sustained? The bank has to pay into that account.
They're paying
well, where are they getting that
insurance
money? Well, I don't know. It has something to do with deposits, right? The money they make off of your deposits. Because when you deposit money, it doesn't stay there. It goes to work. The bank starts investing it. Okay, fine. So they got to pay those fees. Now, that's fine for a couple of large banks. They can handle those fees. What do you think is going to happen when these fees are increased precipitously to the local bank? They can't pay those fees. They're not going to be able to pay for this stupid, irresponsible spending, and those banks are going to vanish.
And George, that was the excuse that the government gave, that this is not taxpayer money. This is from that bank fund that we have. Well, yeah, but trace back, do a forensic accounting of where that money ultimately comes from us, from investments, from deposits. Banks only keep a certain amount of on-hand money in their bank. They put the rest of it out to make money, and they have their own bank sheets and balance sheets, and their profit as well. So that's, you have to play this out where this goes. And so it really wasn't just this bank fund. It's ultimately from us. And then how much can you do with that?
And what do you do with that money? What do you do with the money in your bank?
You're not going to put it in your house.
Well,
that was the thought that I was like, oh, well, people are going to take out a bunch of cash.
Good point, though. But what are you supposed to be doing traditionally? I mean, I'm in that business, right? Real estate it's one of the reasons I got in the business, because real estate, it's a hard asset. I just personally speaking, I'm not giving anybody advice. I'm just giving you my personal notion of this. I didn't like the idea of my investment being there on Monday and not being there on Tuesday. That seemed kind of unattractive to me. And I know that real estate prices go up and down, but at least I've got an asset there. It's there. And so what do you do with money in the bank, Nico? I don't know. We invest in things that we think are going to benefit our families over time, right? I mean, it's ultimately about our kids. I mean, why the hell are we doing any of this? It's a generational mindset, technically. And so you start investing in things, you invest in property. Remember, ultimately, this is about diminishing the independence of the American citizen. It's about diminishing your wealth and diminishing your access to something called private property. Remember that communism believes that the worst possible evil, that really at the root of all the evils that we see in society, is the idea of private property. Because it is the chief mechanism in their view by which the privileged class exploits the working class. If you want to read more about this, I really think you guys should get a book called The Communist, Naked Communist. I'm not talking about Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
Just want to be very clear about that.
She's a socialist. Equal opportunity.
The Naked Communist by W. Cleon Clausen, Klausen. It's a book that was written back in 1958. There's been a number of republications, Nico. It's brilliant. It completely breaks down the communist strategy for taking over a society. There's books out there also by Friedrich Engels, who was a sidekick of Marx. So maybe Engels would say that Marx was his sidekick, but he wrote a book on the origin of the family, the state, and private property. And these things have been written out there. Communist regimes have been doing this crap for the longest time, taking control of the capital mechanisms in the country so that you can control the populace. This is ultimately about diminishing the freedoms that we love in America. That's
George,
what it's about.
I wish I knew the statistic and where it came from, but I heard like 64% of Americans, because of the economy, are now living off of credit cards because they just can't make ends meet. So with that being one aspect of what America's going through, and then all of the protections for you not making your mortgage, you not paying your rent, or there being like protections for people to not get evicted. How is this not the perfect situation to say, okay, you don't pay your bills, we take over your house? I mean, this is right now.
Do you see a pattern, Nico?
The week.
When was the last time we talked about the World Economic Forum and the adage that you shall own nothing and you're going to love it? Mm. I mean, this isn't just about America. I want people to understand, this is an international surge of communism right now. Please understand that. Europe is far more communistic today than it was a year ago.
And ironically, they were fighting it before.
Exactly.
Yeah. They were fighting it collectively.
And Europe is a huge graveyard of failed communistic experiments. You'd think they freaking learned their lesson. They haven't learned their lesson. Because the human being's desire for power is almost insatiable, Nico. And I love what you said, and Karen said about fear. This is an ideology that exploits human fear. It is antithetical to Christianity because Jesus stepped into our midst and said what? Don't be afraid. Mm-hmm. John 6:20, right? He says, don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. Don't be afraid. I'm here to strengthen you. I am your God. Put your faith and trust in me. I'm not about me, really. I'm what? I'm a servant. I serve others. I'm laying my life down for you to recreate a bridge back to God, right? And our morals, really, that sort of form our common law in the United States, ultimately go back to this idea of loving God, loving self, loving neighbor, and looking out for your neighbor and doing things that help human beings. I want people to understand this is an inversion of the American political experiment and an inversion of our spiritual priorities. And how do we push back on this? That's ultimately what people, I'm sure, are asking. How in the world do we push back? I say this with respect. Everybody's got to get off their ass. Really. We have to get involved. We preserve rights by using them.
Exercising them, yeah.
Right? Exercising our rights. So be judicious, pay attention, watch what's going on, take measures, really. And the ballot box is just one of them. But please become involved. If you've called your representative a couple of times, that ain't nothing. To use really grammatically correct English, that ain't nothing. You got to call them over and over and over again and bring their attention to these issues, right? They're not going to turn away.
Well, think about how we got here.
Think
about how we got here. People, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so you have to make yourself heard, not only in the ballot box, but not be afraid to engage in conversations, educate yourself, get involved, go to school board meetings, and every aspect of it. I mean, remember, like a George Soros type couldn't win initially national elections, so he started winning more local elections, and then really made a push, I don't know, a couple of cycles ago, 2 or 3 cycles ago, to go for district attorneys. And now we've seen that experiment play out. Number one, his experiment on his end bore fruit. So he got all these, and then all of them started implementing the same ideas. And we've talked about that on the show before. LA, San Francisco, Baltimore, Atlanta, Georgia, Philadelphia,
San Antonio,
Harris County, Travis County, here in the Dallas County, up there in New York, Manhattan, Brooklyn. All these are all Soros-backed DAs, and they're all implementing the same ideas, and they're all getting the same or similar results. We've got to be involved, and people can't. Ignorance is not bliss. It's dangerous.
So if a man says, "I love America," protest, let's take our nation back, if that man is taken away in handcuffs, then what do we do? That's all.
Depends on who that man is.
Exactly. Well, we'll talk about that in our last segment, coming up next on Sidebar.
With Reputation.
Because you'll find the link to find the after show on Facebook right there, sidebartv.com. Former President Donald Trump said just a couple of hours ago that illegal leagues have indicated that he will be arrested on Tuesday, and he's calling on his supporters to protest. This is all in reference to hush money paid to an adult film star, Stormy Daniels. Is this possible that they're really going to take him off in handcuffs? I mean, that really...
Possible, sure it is.
I can assume anything, but they've done it to others, and they really want to do it to him.
Yeah, it's not about the hush money to Stormy Daniels. It's about the campaign reporting, from my understanding. I don't know all the facts of this yet. I mean, I haven't had a chance to catch up on it because it's just... It's developing, but how do you not talk about that?
That is true. That is one of the reports on it.
So if something happens and you, Karen, from all your wild days when you were younger, want to pay somebody to keep their mouth shut,
right?
That, as long as they're not being questioned by investigators and you're not obstructing justice or tampering with a witness, those would be the 2 crimes for that. You can't pay someone not to talk to investigators. Now, they don't have to talk to investigators. That's always your choice. You don't have to cooperate with an investigation. You have a right to remain silent. You don't have to say anything. But to pay someone not to say anything, that's where you're obstructing justice or tampering with a witness. And you can either threaten them or pay them money. But that's not what so the paying the money to Stormy Daniels is not the issue. It's, from my understanding, it's him using campaign funds and the reporting of those campaign funds, which is normally, from my understanding, again, in New York law, is a misdemeanor. unless you're covering up a crime, then it goes to a felony. So I'm curious what they're saying the crime is he was covering up to pay. I mean, I don't know if they're putting the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart. It seems awkward. I thought I read at some point in the past in 2019, the federal authorities investigated this and they closed the case. They chose not to move forward on this from a federal position. And so, of course, this DA, and that's no surprise, looking for any reason to prosecute.
Trump used a lot of his own money during the campaign.
But once you donate it to a campaign account, it becomes the campaign money.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Nico's spot on that. That's sort of the crux of the issue. I was trying to go back to what the Manhattan DA actually said, and that seems to be correct. This goes back to when I'm sure everybody remembers Trump's attorney at the time, Michael Cohen, who turned on Trump, and then he testified before a grand jury, and it said that he pleaded guilty to federal campaign finance violations. That was like 5 years ago in 2018. And that's where all this stems from. What are those campaign finance violations? And I guess they're saying that I was trying to figure out what is it that they're alleging. And so if Alvin Bragg is going to be successful, Nico, what does he have to prove? He's got to prove that Trump did what? That he falsified records to cover up another crime? I mean,
I don't know. I haven't seen the indictment, so I don't know what he's charged with. So I'll look at the elements of the charge once he's finally.
I don't know what
charged.
it is.
We don't know what it is. We're speculating.
But you said the misuse, having campaigned yourself, and
Well, this is a
more
federal
about this than any
campaign
of us.
versus state. So what my understanding is that if you typically in their state law, if you mislabel or misreport your campaign finances, it's normally a misdemeanor unless you misreport to cover up an underlying crime, which would make it a felony under state law in New York. That's my understanding.
So basically using campaign funds to use as hush money.
Right.
That's the problem here. And then
apparently
trying to cover it up by falsifying the records of his campaign.
Yeah, if you wanted to pay Stormy Daniels to keep, no pun intended, to keep her mouth shut, she should have paid her private. He should have paid her private money.
But what is the difference?
I don't know how substantiated this is and how strong or weak the evidence is. I'm just telling you what we're reading.
That is the claim. I think that's right.
Yeah.
It's not the hush money thing from.
No, that's not.
That's a misdemeanor, right?
That's not even a misdemeanor.
That's not a misdemeanor.
No. Like I said, people get when you have a deal, a big business deal, and you get a offer acceptance consideration. You're given a kind of a gag clause where I can't talk about this. I can't talk about the details of this.
Almost like an NDA.
You're right. You're right. Non-disclosure. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you pay for that, and that's fine. And there's consideration, and there's usually consequences financially and contract law-wise if you violate that on the payout of your money or whatever the deal was. So that's not the issue, from my understanding of
Trump said there was an NDA. And that it was a signed agreement.
Yes, that's correct. No, you're saying that the misuse of campaign funds is a felony? It's not a misdemeanor?
And the New York law is different than state law. It would be a misdemeanor. My understanding, what I've read, the little that I've read, is that it's normally a misdemeanor under New York law unless the misuse or the misfiling or the misclassification of your funds, campaign funds, is to cover up an underlying crime.
And I think that's it. I think that's what's going on here.
Now, I'm curious what their theory is the underlying crime is. Because paying Stormy Daniels to be quiet is not a crime.
Well, the misuse of the campaign funds to pay her off would be considered a crime?
No, well, I don't know. I'm not depending on how they charge him. I'm saying they're saying that he misclassified or he didn't report it
his
accurately.
money with the campaign
his campaign funds, right? Yeah.
All right.
See.
So
Seems like
Trump
they're being
says
creative.
that he has no plans to drop out of the race, even if he does get indicted. Can
nor should
person run even if they're indicted? And I know what an indictment is, but a lot of people think that, okay, he's guilty because he was indicted. But it's just charges,
It's
right?
a formal charging. So an indictment, you cannot be charged with a felony in the state, at least in Texas for sure, or federally without a formal indictment from a grand jury. They always say that you can indict a ham sandwich. Why? Because the prosecutorial agency, at least in Texas for sure, can decide what they show to a grand jury.
Interesting.
So anybody, when I was a district attorney, I told the prosecutors, I said, guys, girls, this is the situation. You present everything we have. You don't piecemeal it. if you take something to indictment, you should be ready to try that case within months or weeks, really. But obviously, you get the defense time to do the discovery. But I'm just saying, be ready to try that case. A lot of prosecutors in the past would indict a case and then work the case up as time goes on, because the bar, the standard to indict someone is so much lower than to beyond a reasonable doubt to convict somebody. And so they usually work, a lot of prosecutors, not all, in the past, would work up their case after indictment, post-indictment, which when I was DA, I said, look, you should be ready to prosecute that case before a jury when you indict. Don't piecemeal it. It's not right.
But if you indict Trump, I mean, it doesn't matter what happens. All that people know is that he's indicted. I don't know if people care about the rest of the story.
Look, his supporters aren't going to be swayed. People that can't stand him are going to say there's one more talking point. The women on The View, with their miserable lives, are going to continue to be miserable and to say what they're going to say. MSNBC is going to say what they're going to say. Fox is a toss-up. Who knows? People need to really analyze what this really means. The only other president this is unprecedented. They potentially could have been indicted was Nixon, and then Ford pardoned him. But whether that should have happened or not is another story too. Look, I don't think a president is above the law. Don't get me wrong. But think about what we're doing here. If President Trump's indicted, now you're opening Pandora's box. Be careful the world you help create, because someday you may have to live in it. How many times have I said that over the years, Karen?
100.
But it's true.
Yeah, I get it.
You're keeping track, 100 exactly.
Okay, 100.
But think about this. but think about that. Because then what happens? Now, when a Republican prosecutor somewhere, when a Republican, secretary, attorney general, when a Republican whatever is in charge, can they go after Biden? Can they go after Hillary? Can they go after Obama for something I'm not saying that there's anything to go after him for per se. I'm just saying, can they do these things? Yes, of course you can. But just because something's permissible doesn't mean it's beneficial for the country as a whole. And what are they really going after him for? This wasn't, trading secrets and codes to the nuclear arms that we have, or betrayal of our country. This is not. I think this is a slippery slope, and it's dangerous.
Not only the bottom line is they don't want him to run.
That's it.
That's what that's all about 100%. Here. In fact, Joe Tacopina, I couldn't remember his last name. He's a Trump's defense lawyer, and he was on MSNBC talking about this prospective indictment. And he said, let him. He said, if they bring this case, I believe it's going to catapult him into the White House, because it's going to show that they're weaponizing the justice system. And he says, if they even think about bringing this in as a felony, that's why I was asking, what's a misdemeanor, what's a felony? Yeah. And so I was trying to figure out what they're saying Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, is ultimately trying to do. And he says the way Tacopina is describing it, well, he's pursuing this sort of hairy and complicated strategy, and so he thinks that there's a huge risk that these felony charges are going to be dismissed, even before a jury would consider them.
But how? I'm curious why he says that. But they're going to be dismissed by the prosecutor that indicted him? Who's going to dismiss it?
That he's going to have no choice, because it's going to fail on evidence. That a jury won't even.
Presumably he had done that assessment before he took it to the grand jury. This is my point.
Presumably.
You don't just test your theory because the bar to indict someone. Everybody says, "Oh my gosh, this person's been indicted." That's a very low standard. It's a bare minimum standard. There's a series of checks and balances in our justice system that, if done correctly, should work well. If you have people in there that are not political, that are not weaponizing our justice system, that are really trying to seek justice. In Texas, the oath of a prosecutor is to ensure justice is done. To ensure it. That means that you got to look for it. You don't wait back for it. You have to make sure it happens. And I took that serious because these are people's lives. This is not a Monopoly game or Parcheesi or poker. This is not any of it. This is real life that affects people. Allegations are serious. The reason why God hates lies and false allegations in Proverbs 6:16 is because it's character assassination. That's a big deal. And how it affects people. We got to use, our mouth, meaning our accusations and our words, very wisely. Proverbs also says the power of life and death is in the tongue. And so we have to be very careful. I worry about our constitutional republic. I really worry about our country.
Who's weaponizing the political system in the United States? Who's doing that? Is it Republicans or is it Democrats? Who was all about Russia? Remember that? The Mueller nothing burger to the tune of more than $20 million that came to nothing, right? Who was responsible for driving that? What about the first impeachment? How did that go? Second impeachment? How did that go? The Mar-a-Lago raid? That's been hugely successful. Wow, that's really stopped Trump. They're not going to stop. These guys are weaponizing the political system in the country, not Republicans. Republicans have tons of problems. That's not one of them. That is an existential threat to the country, what these guys are doing with the political system. I don't think they're going to let Trump run, Nico. I don't. I think they're going to put the full power of the government, the Department of Justice, you name it. They're going to go after him. I'm worried about the former president's safety. I'm not just worried about his legal woes, which I think are premised on really a lot of faulty premises. I'm worried about his safety. That's a very real problem. We've never been there in this country before.
Yeah, we'll continue these conversations, right, Karen, on Sidebar after show coming up. You can close this out.
Well, sidebartv.com. Please check it out. Tell friends about it. That's where you can find us. No. George.
Classy.
George, when you said you were, I know, when you said you worried about the safety of the president, the former president, I never thought that you were supposed to call him the former president. Once a president, always a president, but they call Trump the former president.
You shouldn't do that. I mean, when someone steps down, if someone's been a judge, out of respect, we say judge.
Judge, exactly.
If someone retires from the military, you still call them colonel.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So when you talk about the safety of Trump, what are you talking about?
First of all, I'm very pleased to call him president. I'd welcome that day again. I think we're in uncharted waters in the United States, but this isn't new in third world countries where going after your political opponents is as common as breathing. It happens. It's all over the place. Study your history. Latin and South American countries are replete with this crap.
Ukraine. What are you talking about?
Yes.
Right. No question about it. So this isn't new, but it's new in the United States, and I'm worried that it's a point of no return. How do you come back from that? It only gets worse from that point on. And that's what I'm trying to say here. And this isn't funny. And so the question is, do you think these guys will dare to do it? That's always the question. Nico, do you think they're going to do it? Do you think they're actually going to cross that line?
Well, you wouldn't have thought that they would have raided his home. Not you,
Exactly.
I mean, people in general. I mean, so yeah, I think they could do it.
What I said during the break, and you guys tell me if you think I'm overreacting, am I being conspiratorial again? If you're a serious student of history on this kind of nonsense, I don't think they're going to let him run. I think they're going to bring, again, the full power and force of the Department of Justice. They're truly going to weaponize the government against the president. And they don't need a serious charge, Nico. I mean, they can.
They've already proven that.
Yeah, right. Stormy Daniels and campaign.
So embarrassed.
By the way, this was not new. They brought these campaign violations 5-6 when Trump was president. He denied all this. It's nonsense. I mean, look, one thing you can say about Trump, and setting aside his quirky and frankly some of the stupid ass stuff he said about DeSantis. I mean, we all know Trump's failings here. We get it. But Trump is not a hyper successful businessman to the tune of 5 decades by accident. The man knows how to run an organization. He knows how to dot his I's and cross his T's. He does. He's very organized, hyper anal about those kinds of things. Again, I asked the question, Nico, can you think of anyone who's been more investigated?
And nothing
by
found.
more investigative bodies?
No.
This is what they got? Honestly? What does that tell you? So I know it's an argument from silence, but it's a pretty good argument, I think, in this case. What exactly are you going to bring it at this guy? They're going to have to, no pun intended, trump up charges. They're going to make it look like it's a big deal. Can have all these throw a press conference. Everybody's got their little American flag. Everybody looks very official. Everybody's representing a different
Holding a Bible.
different sector of American security forces, whatever, or Department of Justice bureaucracy, and they're going to make it look really official, probably. I don't think they're going to let him run. In 1 month, if Donald J. Trump is elected and he becomes the 46th president of the United States, or is it 47th president of the United States?
47.
Becomes the 47th president of the United States. I think based on what he knows and all of the school of hard knocks that he's graduated from, Nico, here since 16, I think he will dismantle this corrupt apparatus in 30 days. That's how long it's going to take him. He's going to know where all of these mole rats are hidden, and he's going to go after them. He's not playing games anymore. They know that about him. His tolerance level right now is non-existent. All that olive branch extensions that happened in the first 6 months of his administration that I think did him in some ways, that's over. This guy's going to come in and he is going to be furious. He is going to be the battering ram. Okay? And they know that. There's no way in hell these guys are going to let him anywhere near 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And that's why I said, Nico, I'm worried about his safety. I don't think it's going to stop with these indictments.
God forbid. I hope that's not
so
true.
I'm very worried about that.
I think there's a point to be made also about what this country needs. If you really, truly love this country and you want to preserve whatever's left of it, I try to look at society and people that aren't typical Trump supporters, and you listened, and he got a lot of backlash for it, of course. When Joe Rogan said, "I'd vote for Trump over Biden," and he wouldn't vote for Bernie Sanders initially. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Remember that, Salo? I mean, so and he says, and Joe was just looking at a common sense. Look at our country. Look at the things we're talking about. Look at the things that everyone used to agree on, like men and women and sports and this and gender change operations for 5 and 6 year olds and parents not having the rights over their kids and school and hating this country. I mean, all and open borders and all the stuff that's going on, which I don't know if you guys read. A grandma and her 7-year-old granddaughter were T-boned by a person evading police in a small county down in Texas, and killed the grandma and the 7-year-old girl because they were in. It's just. I mean, when you look at those things, this has nothing to do with political platforms. It has to do with the set of ideas that are being advocated by each platform, and so you look at that. To George's point, you almost need a Trump. You almost need a Trump to combat the insanity of the left. It's insane. You almost do. And in a perfect world, you're only going to get 4 years of him. So do what Trump does for 4 years, and then you hand it off to someone like a Ron DeSantis or somebody that really has the courage, but also maybe a little bit more of the pizzazz, maybe to to be more palatable, or whatever the word is to opponents, because he's done a wonderful job in Florida. But we're in a very interesting time. I don't want to. It's not doom and gloom. Can't help but think about
doom and gloom.
Well, it's not doom and gloom, because it's not as if. Let me tell you what doom and gloom is. Doom and gloom. We went on a little trip to the beach this week for the kids' spring break, and I unintentionally watched the movie called Spirit. I don't know what the name of her name is. It's some 16-year-old girl.
Yes.
Is that the one where she traveled in a boat by herself around the whole country, around the whole world, not the country? No, it's real. It's a real
Documentary.
Her name is Jessica Watson.
Okay.
She was an Australian girl, 16
I've
years
seen the
old.
previews.
She wanted to break the world record. She goes off. It took her 210 days to go around the world. It's a fascinating. She lives, by the way. Sorry, spoiler alert. but it's crazy. It's a crazy story. It's an amazing story. But all that to say, she's looking at this 70-foot wave. That's doom and gloom. It's like, oh shit. I mean, that's coming. No matter that is inevitable. There's no way.
And she's by herself.
And then she's by herself.
Yeah.
And so that's doom and gloom. I mean, are we seeing the wave come? Yeah, man, it's on its way, but it's not there yet.
It's doom and gloom. I'm assuming, I don't know how close she was to the wave. It probably doesn't matter at some point. It
engulfed her, but she went under 15 feet.
Yeah.
Thought she was going to die, and then I guess it comes up.
But, you know,
we're under the wave right now, though. Come on.
It is an appropriate analogy. There is a point after which it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to get submerged. And I think what we try to do here is we try to warn. It's not about
whether you stay down or not.
Yeah, exactly. We try to warn. We try to help people understand that they have tools at their disposal. The founders of this amazing country put tools at their disposal. But tools are useless if you don't use them. That's the point here. And it's not just, again, about speaking out. I try to avoid saying, just go speak out. No, get informed first. Understand what's going on. Understand your rights. Know that Constitution. At least the first 10 amendments.
George, man, this is such a big point.
And exercise them.
Think about that Constitution. It takes about 6 years to overturn the government from political sways, because you have Congress every 2 years. I mean, you have the House. You have senators every 6 years. You have president every 4 years. I mean, so it takes the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's not mistake about it.
You mean to undo precedents from previous administrations?
No, to switch parties. I mean, to have complete party control. Okay. I mean, you have to, it takes time. There's a checks and balance. If it wasn't for that very slim Senate majority, Trump would have been impeached.
Right.
Not because the evidence supported
it.
100%. He would have been impeached. Mm-hmm. End of story. The only reason why, think about our founding fathers and how brilliant they were to have those checks and balances, because the House did what they did, which is stupid, and only because the Senate had the votes, and then there was miraculously courage on certain people because they saw the end result. And that's why I give Ted Cruz a lot of credit. I give him a lot of credit because it didn't get much more personal than talking about your family on a campaign. Trust me, I've been there. And it's hard, man. But it seems, I don't know Ted Cruz. I mean, I've met him in passing once or twice, but for him to get past all that, to know what's really at stake, it's our country. You have to just give honor to where honor is due and say, God bless you, Senator Cruz, for being a bigger man for the sake of the country
and just continuing on
your lineage, your grandchildren and your great grandchildren. That's what our founding fathers did. God bless Ted Cruz for doing that. I wish more people could do that too, because it's not about Donald Trump. He's pulling off a Band-Aid. He's the Band-Aid scraper. That's all he's doing. He's pulling the scab off. But it's not about him. If we get 4 more years, he'll be a voice, whatever, if he gets in office. But what has he truly exposed when you think about his presidency, and then how everything was? I always tell people, being involved in politics locally, there was a big stealth movement going on. And then Trump just pulled the Band-Aid off and put everything up front and out in the open. And you see, even from the first time he ran, that's why I think his tactics are not needed. He's got enough to work with, and how they're trying to dismantle and undo this country, than him using stupid names and calling Ron names and everybody else. He doesn't need that. He doesn't need to campaign from behind. He should campaign from the front.
But the tactics, Nico, getting back to, I want to combine that point with your earlier point, because we need a little bit of that Trump sort of contained insanity. Because he's willing to say some pretty outrageous things rhetorically to bring attention to legitimate issues. So you might say his approach is illegitimate to focus on legitimate issues. Okay, fine. Rhetorically illegitimate.
Like when he
right?
said that we were letting a whole bunch of bad guys in when we didn't have control of the border.
Right. They're sending us their worst, the rapists and the murderers and so forth. Yeah. And the reality is that a lot of it's true, not all of it. And so what's the major message there? We have a porous border and we have no idea who the hell is coming through. And the net effect is that it's destabilizing, excuse me, the American economy and the American culture. Okay, so Trump's willing to do that, and that's a huge asset at this time. If you can get him in power, that's the kind of force, that's the kind of potency, that's the kind of fearlessness that you need to go after this systemic rot that has taken control of the American political system. Again, conservatives against communists. This is no longer. We're no longer dealing with Daddy's Democrat Party here.
No,
we're dealing with people who are trying to destroy the country as founded. They want no parts of an America that magnifies individual liberties. They want to erase, to delete the individual and turn the individual into a subject of the state. This is a sort of incremental, right? Boil the frog slowly model to really sort of eroding American distinctives. And Trump is a threat to that.
How many kids, Karen, know how many stripes are on the flag?
That's sad.
And what
it's
they,
sad.
And what they mean. And
I know.
The stars are on the flag.
I know.
And what that means. And the Star-Spangled Banner. And what does that mean? I mean, how many people know these kids? We're indoctrinating these kids to hate
this country,
which makes it easier to change the country. Think about that. I mean, this is not.
So
I mean,
horrible.
if you've read or did the audiobook of Sun Tzu, a lot of this is in the art of war, where you take over a country without firing one shot, and we know that's the part of the 4 stages of subversion, ideological subversion we've talked about before with Yuri Bezmenov. We've mentioned him before, that YouTube video. I mean, you demoralize. You have to change the morals and the definitions of right and wrong. Destabilize. You create a crisis, and then you normalize again, like the new normal. Think about that. And if you look at that in his interview, as we've said in the past many times, ironically, it was in 1984, and he thought back then we were sufficiently demoralized back then in '84. Can you imagine now? I mean that when you go, I mean, it's eerie to listen to that video, to watch that video back then. But then you see how it plays out in our moral compass. And I was just at the beach, and look, I mean, I was a young idiot myself. My wife goes, "Chulo, you don't forget." I mean, I did different stupid shit, but to me, it's not knowing or having these. I mean, the disrespect. I mean, I was watching this. Mom came into the little workout facility we were staying at the place we were staying at, the complex, and these teenage girls were just laughing, being really loud. Okay. Another set of kids, 9 and 10-year-olds, they shouldn't have been in the workout facility, were there, candy on the floor. Dad comes in and goes, "Guys, what are you doing?" And they didn't go Johnny on the spot and listen to Dad. They still pushed back and resisted him. So that group of yahoos leaves. And then you got these little girls, and the mom shows up, and she wants to work out with the kids, and they start laughing. "Shh, guys, shh," she's telling them, because it's loud. It's a small workout gym. And they start laughing at her because she's trying to get up on the Bluetooth, and she actually goes into theirs, and they're just stupid, uncomfortable, immature, laughing at her. They're 16 and 17, 15, whatever. They embarrass her so much that she leaves.
Oh.
And I almost said something. I almost said, "Don't be disrespectful to your mom. What's the matter with you? It's your mom. What's wrong with you people? You know how embarrassing you're making yourself look to other people here?" There was only 3 or 4 of us in there at the time. But it was embarrassing. And I said, "No, use wisdom. Keep your mouth shut. The mom could turn on me,
I know that always happens. Yes.
I've seen too many. And then, "Mom, are you really mad at me, Mom?" She calls her mom. In front of me, "Are you really mad at me? Come on, get over it, Mom. I was just joking." I mean, just this level of disrespect. Look, we've all been disrespectful to our parents at some point, and it was wrong. Well, what'd you say?
Make slaps.
Well, discipline, right? You spare the rod, you lose
Make
the
slaps
child.
great again? Is it just
Look, I mean, so you
It's
just have to
ugly.
be very careful. I mean, to me, it's the lack of respect. Respecting this country, respecting authority. I mean, I'm not saying question authority, very different. Respecting authority and questioning authority are 2 different things. My pop taught me a lot of things, and he says, "Son, you can say anything to anybody, whether it's the president of the United States or the principal of your school, either one. as long as you say it right. What was he teaching me, Karen?
Respect.
But I didn't say F off. I'm just telling you.
I
And
know.
other people say
Done
F
it to
off
me.
I mean, not about that. But I'm just saying. I mean, you can.
I do.
It's doing it the right way. So questioning authority is a good thing. That means you have a free mind, a free speech. You're a big citizen. You can do that. You're not. The government's not bigger than you. Authority, is something that should be taken with tremendous responsibility. But disrespecting it is another story.
Remember when COVID happened and then everybody tried to stuff that term down our throats, the new normal.
Yeah.
But there are so many new normals, and I don't want to start a whole new topic, but when you do start talking about a new normal being like, what was it, that Dr. Rachel Levine saying that gender affirming care for kids, minors, no matter how young they are, it's just going to become like the new normal. And the Biden government supports it. That's just one example of all these new normals. The other being, just like you said, no respect, no love for America.
I really wish that would have come up during the radio show. I think this is a
know.
conversation. We should really bring that up. That is very. I can't use a strong enough word of how harmful and damaging it is to our society, to our young people. Kids need to be kids, man. I don't want kids at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years old, or 9 or 10 even, or 11. I think when you start getting to the pre-puberty stage, from my record, I think 11, 12, you start talking to children about reproduction, about sexuality. But before that, I mean, kids used to worry about, being Superman, Batman, playing cops and robbers.
A kitty cat. I know.
Cowboys and Indians, unicorns. Now they're talking about the pronouns. And so I think Rachel Levine, or whatever his name is, or whatever, and I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just saying, because I don't know what the situation is with transitioning with this person.
Dick.
Or not.
That's
Dick
his name.
Levine.
But Richard, yeah. I mean, but whatever. I don't know if he has one or not still. I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on there. All I'm saying is, you don't look at even just 10 years ago, and people used to think that there was something that needed to be addressed psychologically with that person. And now we've normalized that. What happened? Did we get new evidence? Did we get new data to say that should be normalized? How does that benefit kids? I'll tell you, I got a very interesting. Someone sent me a text, and I'm probably not gonna. It's a couple of texts, but they need to be. I'll look it up. He said, if you put 10 men and 100 women on an island, and come back in 100 years, you're gonna see a thriving society. If you put 10 men and 100 transgender women, which are really men, in an island, you'll find 110 set of bones. You won't thrive. I might be bastardizing it a little bit, but you get the gist of what that statement was. I think it was a very good statement, and it was legitimate. The natural order is for a male and a female, with the way that God designed male and a female to have a complementary relationship, sexually and also societally, to raise a child, so our community and a society can thrive.
Exactly.
There's nothing crazy about that. It happens to be biblical, by the way, because the designer designed this, which is God. But there's nothing crazy, and I think more people are waking up to it. People like a Joe Rogan, or people like other people needed Russell Brand or somebody, and people are waking up because we're going against everything. There used to be certain things, this being one of them, nobody questioned. I'm going to continue to bring, and I'm glad that it's resurfacing. I've seen it a little bit more. In 2008, I thought it was, not that long ago, Joe Biden was being dismissive and condescending about same-sex marriages. No, you couldn't even
You're
brought
right. You're
up
not going to hear it
transgender
again.
issues with him back then.
Yeah.
Or any Democrat, by the way. Not just him, but he was just, are we serious? I mean, it was very condescending. Are we serious? Are we going to talk about this? Marriages between, I mean, it was very dismissive, very condescending, very whatever. And then, so forget about transgender issues, or I'm not saying we don't be compassionate. I'm not saying that we don't be, empathetic with them, or, trying to work with them on that, or love on them, or treat them with respect. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that should not be pushed as a religion onto our children. I want children to be children. I don't want Disney talking about it. I don't want cartoons to talk about it. Now cartoons are talking about it. Just let kids be kids. When they get older, with the advice and the direction of their parents, which the parents have a right to do that, they can make a decision as an adult. We don't, and I've said this on the show before, we don't want kids, they don't have a choice to go to school. Kids have to go to school. It's called truancy. They don't have a choice to smoke. They don't have a choice to drink. They don't have a choice to drive. They don't have a choice to have sex. They can't even have sex. They don't have a choice to do anything, and that they can't vote. They can't do anything, but they can vote on their gender. They can vote on irreversible procedure that's going to change. I mean, now you're seeing a lot of these transitioning people that regret doing it, and God bless them for speaking out. God bless them for speaking out. I think this is very dangerous. People need to speak up. I wish Democrats, Republicans should come together and say, can we not be tribalistic? Can we agree on a set of ideas? Can we really try to rebuild that foundation that we agreed on, which is freedom of speech, and let children be children, and gender is gender, and boys are girls, and girls are girls. And like Kindergarten Cop said, so in the movie, when that little boy comes up to Arnold Schwarzenegger and says, boys have penises, girls have vaginas. And he was like, oh, yeah, I guess. I mean, that was deep, right? I mean, right, Saulo? I mean, think about that. I mean, it wasn't anything that we questioned.
It's the funny thing. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, listen, we need to cut everything Nico just said and put it maybe as a reel or something, because that's really well said. You can't even have that kind of clarity. Public officials will not speak in those terms right now. Why? This LGBT movement is a fascistic cult in the country. It's not just about, and believe it or not, that video he sent me of Frank Rodriguez, his latest rant, which was excellent.
It was good, wasn't it?
I mean, you just cannot disagree with anything the man says. He was spot on. He's absolutely right. And this is not about the freedom to do whatever you want sexually. This is now imposing on people their view of reality, which is a degrading view. It's a degenerative view. The analogy you just gave about the 10 men on the island with women, that it doesn't get any clearer than that. That would be considered hate speech in Washington, D.C. That's outrageous. We can't state the obvious. You can't state the obvious that kind of behavior, if the full force of government and tax subsidies get behind furthering that kind of behavior, that it's going to have a necessarily degrading effect on society. This is rocket science. We need a PhD in sociology to understand that. But we can't have that kind of honesty anymore. Why? Well, because there is a political effort to bring disorder to the most fundamental level of American society. The vacuum that it'll create will be a vacuum nicely fit for the government. That's the point. And this is not new. Again, this is very Hitlerian. I was trying to pull up a quote from him.
From Hitler?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's what he said on this. Because if Germany was going to be the country that Hitler envisioned, then the state would need to control children. Here's Hitler. Your child, speaking to parents, belongs to us already. What are you? You're going to pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community. End of quote. So what's he saying? Well, he said the adage that we've mentioned here many times, right, Nico? He who controls the youth.
I was just going to say that when you put the
controls,
yep.
right? Controls
the future.
The future.
Yep.
And he was pushing for the idea that parents simply need to know their place. They need to know the limits of their responsibility. If they cooperated with state, everything's going to go well with them. If they don't, they're going to be edged out. And he really believed, and he had policies around the notion that parents can control the child's body, but the state controls their soul. That's what this is all about. It's about a generational overtaking. I mean, they're already in the future, and they're smart for doing it, and we're just asinine for letting them.
Well, this is why George and I advocate, Karen. You know, any church that is not speaking out against this really needs to pray deeply. Christian church or any church. I mean, even mosques and temples. Everybody should be doing this. But I'm speaking to the Christian community because, for now, it's still the majority religion or mindset or faith in this country. Whether people really know what they believe or not is another topic we've talked about in the past. But you got to speak out against this. The Christian mandate of going to all nations, making disciples, students of all men, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded, is a political statement. It's Matthew 28:19. It's a political statement. We've talked about politics in here a lot. We talk about it, not all, but the vast majority. But the root word of politics, polity, a set of ideas advocated by a group of people to affect the affairs of the community. That's what politics means. Now, if you want to make it partisanship, that's fine. That's political platforms is something else. But there were politics long before Republican and Democrats. We can study the politics of Greece and the politics of Rome and the politics of whatever society in the past. But we think of politics as Republican and Democrat. Politics, from the root word polity, is a set of ideas advocated by a group of people to affect the affairs of the community or the city. And that is a political statement, Matthew 28:19. Now, to force it on people, no, you want to persuade people. Remember, we talked about this in the past. There's two ways to control people. It's by force or through persuasion. This country was set up to be controlled by persuasion. And that means you have to have a superior idea, but you have to be able to share it so it can be tested in the court of public opinion. So we're at a very interesting, we're on a crossroads, and people have to make these choices.
Play it out, Nico. Play out what does Dick, a.k.a. Rachel Levine, mean when he says that ultimately this is going to be embraced? This is inevitable. The sort of trans ideology and sort of adopting kids en masse into that cult. What's he saying? If the Democrats take control in 2024, you're going to see a true mass weaponization of the so-called Respect for Marriage Act. You're going to see pretty much what's been tried before. I mentioned Hitler, and it's pretty much what happened there. And in the aftermath of Hitler taking control, private and denominational schools were phased out of Germany. And they did it primarily through excessive permitting requirements and through regulatory fees they simply couldn't pay. And homeschooling was phased out entirely, and any kind of alternate educational options for parents were eliminated, really sort of squeezed out. And so the objective here is to steal that child's heart, and like I said, leave the body for the parents to raise. But the reality is the two are interconnected, right? You change a child's mind or you manipulate a child's mind and soul, the body follows along. You can't separate the two. And this isn't new. And I think you're going to see a weaponization of that act to squeeze out alternate options for parents. This is why we keep saying this is the most consequential election in American history. In 24, it's hard to argue anything different about 24. And I'm again, what I just said, 20 minutes ago, I don't want to be contradictory. It's inevitable that they're going to go after Trump. They're not going to let him anywhere near the presidency. The only caveat to that is by Americans rising up en masse, Democrats, Republicans, truly concerned independents, who are looking at this with eyes wide open, who overwhelm really sort of the voting systems in the country. If we can truly unify against this madness, then I think, and it's not about Trump. I love that you said that. It really isn't about, it's not, right? It's not about Trump. He just happens to be the battering ram that we're going to be using.
I wish the Democrat Party was taken over by more Joe Manchins and Harold Fords. I really do. I mean, I disagree with Harold on some of the things he makes, some of the points he makes, but a lot of
and you disagree with Manchin on a couple.
Oh yeah, of course. But it's not. It's not. They're neither one of them are socialist. Neither one of them are communist. They're not Marxist. They're traditional, old school. They don't realize. I mean, I say this respectfully. They don't realize that they're not Democrats today anymore. They're not,
and that they don't run the party anymore.
Yeah, right? they're just a
Hanging
voice.
On.
They're just a voice.
Right.
I mean, Manchin is playing to his voter base because his voter base is still blue dog, and I'm sure a lot of Republicans vote for him too, and I can see why on a lot of reasons. But he's not. He couldn't win a national election. He wouldn't. Neither one. Harold Ford nor Joe Manchin would win a national nomination for presidency.
Exactly right.
And that tells you something. Yeah. But I wish the Democrat Party would go back to that, or would go to that. I think that would you'd have a strong, vibrant country again, and you would disagree on certain things, and you'd have heated, passionate debates on them. It'd be respectful. Both of them are respectful. You'd have the betterment of the whole country as a whole in mind. You'd have strong borders. You'd have a good economy. You'd have a strong military. You'd have support for law enforcement as an institution and holding individual law enforcement officers responsible. And you'd have an opportunity to have debate, open-spirited debate. And it's not like that anymore.
Sounds like a distant dream.
Well, I mean, it's a dream, but it could be. So was the United States was a dream for our founding fathers.
That's right.
It was a lot more contentious than this. I mean, against Great Britain and all, everything going on, the French and everything, and Native Americans, Indian War, and all this other stuff. I mean, our founding fathers in this country, I mean, it's fascinating to study that stuff now. I didn't appreciate it when I was younger studying it.
No, and they called it that. You're right. I mean, the Federalist Papers, an 85 paper volume that's arguing for
James Madison, right?
Absolutely, yeah. He was the chief writer. That's sort of arguing for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's a great apologetic. Somewhere between paper 34 and 39, he sort of presents America as this great experiment. Mm-hmm. And why was it an experiment? Right, it's an experiment because of the sort of duality of human beings. We have this amazing capacity for goodness, and we also have an amazing tendency towards depravity. And so it's an experiment. How do you think this is going to work out? You know, so I don't know. How are we doing? I'm genuinely concerned and worried. This show, what motivates us here, I don't want to speak for Nico, but I think I can, is that we're genuinely concerned about the country that our kids are going to be growing up in. I know you are too, Karen. You got two beautiful daughters that you love very much. What's that country going to look like? I mean, I try to pull time away during the day and just close my eyes and reflect on the things that I've been blessed with. And I mean that literally. I try to just sort of still my mind, and I'm just so grateful, especially considering our background and where my family came from. Having come from a communist takeover in an African country, I'm so grateful for this country. I can't put it into words. If I try, Nico, you and I have talked about it. I'll tear up about it because I'm just so deeply grateful. And compared to my parents, you've been around my parents. Forget about it. I mean, they're even more so than I am, and I think they're listening today. It is unconscionable to me that we would lose this. That we would be such shitty stewards of what we've been given that we would lose it, Nico, and then we would lose it to our kids. They would never have the opportunity to understand the freedom of movement and the freedom of expression and the freedom to pursue what God has called them to pursue. It is unconscionable to me. It's intolerable to me. And so I think that's a huge motivator to this show. Not doom and gloom, but to help people understand reality.
And I guess, I mean, I know we're going to wrap up here, but I mean, there's two quotes from James Madison, and I'll leave you with the thought for myself that I really resonated with me. And there's a lot. James Madison was a powerhouse and just one of our founding fathers. If men were angels, no government would be necessary, right? If angels were to govern men, neither internal or external controls of the government would be needed. So we're not angels, right? So we have this tremendous capability. We have potential. Americans, human beings, have potential, but we also have a lot of pitfalls. And so that's why James Madison also argued that reason should control the day. It is our reason alone that must be placed in control of government. Our passions must be controlled by it. We're seeing the opposite of that today. Reason is not being controlled, and this is what I would love. I would love to start a movement, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, around this James Madison quote. It is our reason alone that must be placed in control of our passions, feelings, must be controlled by our reason, ultimately. There's two conversations, Karen, I've said this in many talks that I've done and maybe on the show before, that govern pretty much everything I do in my life. Two conversations that I hope to have, that I will have at the transition at the end of my life, if the Lord blesses me with this peaceful transition. To look at my children, or to talk to my children, and God willing, my future grandchildren, and say, guys, I did everything I could to leave this place a little better than I found it. Everything I could. I used every gift, every talent, every opportunity our Lord blessed me with, every responsibility He put in front of me, everything I could to do that for you. Never be afraid to stand for Jesus. be courageous, fight the good fight of faith, kick ass and trust God. That kind of message in the end. And then, if God willing, if I were to close my eyes and then wake up in eternity to hear that passage that we all hope to hear someday, well done, good and faithful servant. That's a conversation it's a two-part conversation that I wish to have very close to each other, if in my way of doing things, if it were to happen my way. But it really motivates me is, what am I doing for my children, my future grandchildren? I'm thinking generationally, but I'm looking eternally. So this is my compass, and this is my mission field. Compass, mission field. And those are the two conversations that govern. I know my life. I know I can speak for George, and I know you're Karen, Salo, Jeff, and Rod, Dom here. He doesn't have kids yet, but I know he wants them, I'm sure, someday. But all that to say is, this is our motivation, and this is something I think that all people can get around, on both parties, and independents as well, can get around to take back our country. And this is not a partisanship thing. It's an American thing. So we used to be Americans at some point, and if God forbid, if we ever get into war, we're going to be Americans again, and I hope it doesn't get to that. All that to say, guys, am I finished? We're good. Thanks for joining us. I hope they enjoyed this conversation. Share this with somebody that you think may benefit from us. We appreciate your support. You know all the sites that you can support us on and share with people. And God bless you guys. Hope to see you next week.